New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to the New Norm. Choose joy. It's a sentiment that's widely shared and celebrated these days. And that's good. In this anxiety-racked world, joy is often hard to come by. That said, you probably haven't heard anyone say, choose sad this week. Yet, that was precisely what the Apostle Paul invited the church in Corinth to do. The church experienced a crisis when one of their members was caught in an act or even a pattern of gross misconduct. And rather than calling out that behavior, the Corinthian church let it slide, at least until Paul heard about it and confronted them in his letter that we now call 1 Corinthians. Paul invited them to grieve over the harm done to the parties involved in these acts and to the unity of the church that was affected by them. And it seems like that's exactly what they did. And in his follow-up note, 2 Corinthians, Paul writes the following: "Your sorrow led you to repentance, for you became sorrowful as God intended, and so were not harmed in any way by us. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. See what this godly sorrow has produced in you, what earnestness, what eagerness to clear yourselves, what indignation, what alarm, what longing, what concern, what readiness to see justice done." Consider this. According to Paul, the church in Corinth became sorrowful. It was a conscious choice that they made together. And they became sorrowful as God intended. Their grief was a part of God's design, God's call, God's invitation to them in that moment. Godly sorrow, or sorrow that results from obedience, turns us towards self-awareness, towards self-evaluation, towards repentance. Worldly sorrow, however, sends us into a tailspin of darkness and despair. And I remember hearing my university president, Dr. Jay Kessler, talk about this in a chapel once, where he compared the godly sorrow of a guy we now know as St. Peter, the Apostle Peter, and Judas, the disciple who betrayed Jesus. We read this in Matthew 27. "Early in the morning, all the chief priests and elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. So they bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. And when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. 'I have sinned,' he said, 'for I have betrayed innocent blood.' 'What's that to us?' they replied. 'That's your responsibility.' So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and ended his life." We've talked before about how there's a difference between guilt and shame. And guilt is regret over something that I have done. Shame is regret over somebody that I am. Guilt speaks to behavior. Shame speaks to identity. Conviction leads to repentance. Condemnation leads to despair. And that's what happened to Judas. That condemnation led to despair. But Judas wasn't the only one who felt deep grief over his betrayal of Christ. When we read the story of Peter's betrayal of Jesus, Peter was warned by Christ that he was going to betray him not once, but 3 times. And after Peter's third denial, as he was speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And then Peter remembered the word that the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly." Like that image of a grown man weeping bitterly, it's intense, it's visceral, it's alarming. And so Peter is struggling with this guilt, not just that on the night that he betrays Jesus, but on the following day, when he's horrifically executed, and then the day following, where there's just total silence. And then imagine his alarm when he hears this rumor that Jesus has risen from the dead. I love the account of the resurrection that we read in Mark's gospel. It says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, which would have been Sunday, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. And they're surprised when they arrive to see that the stone has been removed from the entrance. And it says, as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, and here's what I want you to catch. Go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So these three women, they go and find the 10 surviving disciples, and they say, hey, there's good news. The Lord wants all of you and Peter to know that he's risen. And there's this invitation to Peter kind of tucked into this whole moment that says, like, Peter, I see you. I still love you. I care about you. And I'm committed to us being reconciled and restored. And at the end of John's gospel, we read about the moment where they are. That on the beach of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus surprises Peter and his friends by cooking them breakfast. And John 21:15 says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord. He said, you know I love you. And Jesus said, feed my lambs. And again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. And the third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you'll stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Peter's sorrow triggered a process that pointed him towards needing forgiveness, receiving forgiveness, and moving towards full restoration of his relationship with Christ. And that process wasn't immediate. It wasn't easy. It wasn't fun, but it was good and it was healing, and it resulted in real and lasting growth and transformation for Peter. Listen to Paul's words again. See what godly sorrow this has produced in you. What earnestness, what eagerness to clear yourselves, what indignation, what alarm, what longing, what concern, what readiness to see justice done. And in that scene, you can see that Peter's sorrow is driving him to alarm and longing and concern. It's the sorrow that prompts him to fully lean into the repentance process. If we go to another book in the Bible, we read this in Ezra chapter 10, verse 1. And in this particular scene, the group of people from Israel are coming back to Jerusalem, and they're realizing that part of the reason that God had them exiled into Babylon was because of the sin and the rebellion of their ancestors. And so they're rediscovering the truth of God, the character of God, the call of God, and they're reading the ancient scriptures for the first time. And many of them are horrified to realize how far off track they have gotten as a people and as a generation. And this is what we read in Ezra chapter 10, verse 1. When Ezra was praying and confessing, weeping and throwing himself down before the house of God, a large crowd of Israelites, men, women, and children, gathered around him, and they too, and here's the same phrase that we read in Peter's story, they too wept bitterly. When I read Ezra's story, I'm reminded that if you are the spiritual leader of a community, a church, a nonprofit, a congregation, a family, a marriage, If you're the spiritual leader, you are by default the repenter in chief. It is your job to model holy grief over a wrong done by a person, or in this case, an entire group. And so let me ask you this question. Is there a sadness that might be holy for you in this season? Is there a grief that prompts a change in your mindset, in your speech, in your posture, or in a key relationship? If yes, don't run from it. Lean into it. In that moment, in this season, for all the right reasons, choose sad. God might be using it to cultivate a sense of alarm, concern, or readiness to see justice done. Because as much as we tend to run from sorrow in any form, godly sorrow just might be the best kind of sad. The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, and families stronger through counseling and coaching. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.